Today we'll discuss the different Primaris troops choices, and which ones I think are better in different battlefield roles. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Now we have the points changes and the rules for the Assault Intercessors. I thought it would be interesting to have a bit of a discussion to compare the value of the 4 different Primaris troops choices in terms of their damage output in shooting and melee, and any other factors that might influence you to take one over the other. We'll start by looking at a few numbers on their damage output, and then look at 3 different battlefield roles that you might want your troops to fill, and which ones I feel are best for each. So let's jump right into it. So first of all, here are some numbers for the damage output for the various Primaris bolt weapons. We've got the 3 different versions of Intercessor bolt rifle, the Incursor Oculus bolt carbine, the Infiltrator marksman bolt carbine, and the heavy bolt pistol carried by the Assault Intercessors. This is just how many wounds a unit of 10 will do against all these different targets, and for this comparison we're assuming they're all in optimal range, and I'm not using doctrines for this comparison. We have them aiming against a guardsman, an Ekron warrior, a tactical marine, an intercessor, and a standard toughness 7 vehicle. Against guardsmen, the auto bolt rifle reigns supreme, decently beating out the other options. The standard bolt rifle isn't all that far behind. Things are closer when looking at Necron warriors. The bolt rifle very nearly catches up with the auto bolt one, and the Infiltrator marksman bolt carbine isn't so far behind either, those automatic wounds on 6s really coming into effect on tougher targets. Against tactical marines, the auto bolt rifle and the standard bolt rifle are even, both squads killing around about 3 tactical marines. Against harder targets though, with multiple wounds, the stalker bolt rifles will tend to win out with their extra AP and extra damage, doing decently better than the other versions against the intercessors and any light vehicles that are about. In this next one we've weighted for points, so this is the amount of wounds that 100 points of the models will inflict on the enemy targets, and because all of the units are fairly close in terms of points cost, it's pretty much the same story. The main change is that the Infiltrator marksman bolt carbines drop behind a bit, just because Infiltrators cost a few points more than the Intercessors. In general, if you just want raw damage in the shooting phase, the various Intercessor bolt rifles are likely to be the way to go. And out of the 3, I really quite like the auto bolt rifle now, particularly as it doesn't cost 1 point extra anymore, and when you're in tactical doctrine that extra AP -1 will further the gap between it and the standard bolt rifle. Slightly shorter range though, so there are trade-offs. I would bear in mind as well that the other advantages of the Incursor bolt carbine aren't really taken into account with the maths. Ignoring cover and ignoring negative to hit modifiers are both very powerful, particularly now dense cover is a thing in Warhammer 40k. If we look now at close combat damage output, naturally the Assault Intercessors pretty much reign supreme. In this slide I've compared them against Intercessors with a Thunderhammer and also an Incursor squad, who do have a bit of an advantage, as their paired combat blades give them extra hits when they roll a hit roll of 6. In general, the Intercessors with a Thunderhammer's melee damage will tend to do better against the harder targets, particularly against any vehicles that you might come into contact with. Though I would bear in mind if you did wait for points, then with the Assault Intercessors being so much cheaper, they would narrow the gap considerably. In general, it's really not unexpected that the Assault Intercessors will be best in Assault. They tend to be about 50% better than Intercessors against standard infantry targets, though the gap is far narrower when you target heavier units or vehicles. Just for fun, at the bottom of the slide I did include what would happen if the Assault Intercessors could get a Thunderhammer on the Sergeant, which it is rumoured that they will be able to access when they do get a full multi-part plastic kit. Unsurprisingly, that version wins pretty comfortably in every category, while also still being slightly cheaper than the other 2 units. So which units are going to be better for the different battlefield roles then? I've divided this down into backfield fire support, advancing foot-slogging battle line infantry, and units and transports, if you were doing some sort of impulse or rush. For backfield infantry, you are naturally going to be looking at the Intercessors. It's really a contest between whether you want the anti-heavy power of the Stalker bolt rifles or the more anti-infantry and flexible bolt rifles. Stalkers have better range, access to the option for the sniping stratagem where you can pick off a character, and also some good synergy with the Devastator doctrine, particularly for chapters such as Imperial Fists. The standard bolt rifle ones will get more out of the tactical doctrine, which you will be forced to move into now, so it's a bit more relevant perhaps. They might be a bit more tempted by the grenade launcher for a bit more damage against multi-wound targets, and they have very good stratagems of their own, such as just being plain able to fire twice for 2 command points, and they can potentially even do this on the move if they also use the stratagem to use bolter discipline while moving. Steady advance, I think that one's called. Naturally these guys are going to be far stronger in any armies that are going to be utilising the tactical doctrine more. Ultramarines in particular are pretty great for them, just being able to move and double tap those bolt rifles on the move. Out of the 2 in a complete vacuum, I think I would typically take Stalker bolt rifles. I think that the added range really just helps them outcompete the standard bolt rifle ones, though I could be swayed if you were playing Ultramarines, or perhaps if you just needed more anti-infantry in your list as a whole. Things get a bit more interesting when you're looking at more standard battle line infantry, where you'd have the choice between Intercessors or Assault Intercessors starting in your deployment zone, or Incursors or Infiltrators starting outside of it. In general, for standard Intercessors, I'd be very tempted by the Autobolt rifle for this role. It's really quite potent against most targets if you are in tactical doctrine, plus if you are advancing towards the enemy, then being able to advance and still fire with some accuracy is pretty useful. I think bolt rifles could still be good for this role though, particularly if you're either using Ultramarines or have the command point spare to double tap them using rapid fire. Again, a big advantage of these over the other types is that they can access power weapons, in particular Thunderhammers, and they really can function quite well as decent countercharge threats as well as having decent shooting. Points wise, they're decently cheap, more so than Incursors and Infiltrators, so if you're mainly just looking to spend a minimum amount of points on troops, then that's a factor. And in general, they can have some unique synergies with most chapters, being the core troops choice, aside from maybe the more dedicated melee chapters, who you might be a bit better using Assault Intercessors for. Moving on to the Incursors and Infiltrators. Incursors are certainly a unit that have caught my eye in 9th edition. They went up less than the Intercessors, meaning they're now only 1 point more than them, and having 1 point for a pretty similar stat line and profile, while also being able to set up outside of your deployment zone is really quite good. It just makes them a lot more tactically flexible. It means that against some armies you could get right up in their face and completely rush them, where against other armies you could still fairly happily sit back and still do a decent amount of ranged damage. Their guns aren't as strong as Intercessors, though they do catch up somewhat if they're shooting at things in cover or they're shooting at anything with a -1 to hit. As a nice addition to being able to charge first turn, those paired combat blades mean that they'll get stuck in just a little bit harder than some of the rest, though in general they will be fairly limited to taking out infantry due to just not being able to get big fancy power weapons on the sergeant. They also have quite a fun option for a haywire mine, which at 10 points for generating a few mortal wounds could be pretty handy to plop down on a forward objective and perhaps punish your opponent for taking it, particularly if they have to take it with a vehicle. In particular, I think that these guys could be really strong with chapters such as Blood Angels, White Scars, Black Templars or Space Wolves, all of which have decent buffs to melee. In particular, White Scars being able to advance and charge mean that these guys could be very deep in your deployment zone right from turn 1. If you felt like forking out an extra 3 points, then Infiltrators will do a very similar job. Point for point, their shooting is very slightly better than the Incursors, but not to a very meaningful extent, and certainly not against light infantry. In general, the main reason to take Infiltrators is for that very nice 12-inch deep strike denial bubble, which against some armies is certainly going to be worth it. In general, I'd consider the upgrade to Infiltrators being more of an army purchase rather than an individual unit purchase, as 2 or 3 units of these guys could stretch out across an entire deployment zone and basically stop enemy reserves from getting anywhere near you. I think they are looking better than before, seeing as they only went up 2 points, which is a relatively small increase proportionately compared with the other troops choices. They do have the option to take the Helix Adept and the Infiltrator Comms Array, though I'm still not honestly sure that they're really worth their points. You might well just be better off with more Infiltrators. Finally, I'd bear in mind that they do have the weakest per point durability. All these units are basically the same durability, but these guys pay the most points per model, so each time that you lose an Infiltrator, you do lose a relatively bigger investment. Finally, we come on to the Assault Intercessors, and as the cheapest out of these units, that means that they have the highest per point durability out of any of them. Naturally, they're very differently balanced to the other units. They still do have some shooting output, but it's not really much compared with the others, and really the main reason that you take them is to be good in close combat. They have the best melee damage output versus infantry and lighter targets, though come out fairly even compared with the Intercessors whenever you're taking out vehicles or monsters. Being able to pick up a Thunderhammer really helps. I would consider these guys more strongly if you are running a melee chapter, again things like Blood Angels, White Scars, Black Templars and Space Wolves, all of which add their own benefits to the damage output of these guys and can also help them get into combat a bit easier. In general though, for battle line infantry, I would typically be taking Intercessors myself at the moment over the Assault Intercessors. I just think that having more of their damage weighted towards ranged makes sense really if you're going to be foot slogging up the board, and if you did want some light infantry melee threat, you might actually be better with Incursors, just seeing as they can start closer to the enemy and potentially pull off some nasty turn 1 charges, or even just secure objectives in the midfield for a few turns. So for battle line infantry at the moment, I would pick Intercessors or Incursors as default, and if I was thinking about using Incursors, I'd be tempted to make a sort of army upgrade to make them all Infiltrators, just so your army as a whole could have some real resilience to deep strike. I do feel that they're a bit of a luxury buy though. You can still do some very good forward screening with Incursors. Finally, if you're thinking about getting a delivery system for your Marines and putting them in transports, then I personally wouldn't bother with things like Infiltrators or Incursors, who pay a premium for being able to set up close to the enemy anyway. Impulsor Rush style armies have been popping up occasionally, most notably with armies such as Space Wolves, who kind of struggle to get some of their melee troops to bear. The default loadout for these armies has generally been Intercessors with Thunderhammers, and often packing auto bolt rifles for that very decent damage punch and the range not mattering as much. Now Assault Intercessors exist though, the question got a bit more interesting. With their cheaper points cost, better melee versus infantry, and still having at least some range damage output, which they can augment with grenades if necessary, these guys are certainly going to be a decent competitor for putting in your transports. In general, at the moment, I'd say that these guys are pretty much even in terms of being useful units to put in impulsors. I really do like the Assault Intercessors' damage output and the fact that they're cheaper too, but having decent ranged fire and also being able to tangle with vehicles fairly effectively are very solid advantages for the Intercessors, and you really do want to be using quite a generalist unit in transports, seeing as space is brought at a premium. I think if Assault Intercessors do acquire the option to take a Thunderhammer on the Sergeant, then it'll probably tip the balance in their way, particularly for more melee-orientated chapters. But until then, I think that both of them are pretty much equally viable. It's just your choice of whether or not you want a bit more range damage or a bit more melee damage versus infantry. So overall, I don't think that Intercessors are going to be going anywhere as one of the most common Primaris troops choices, though compared with previously, I think it's much more of a choice between the different options. I'm sure we'll be seeing plenty of Assault Intercessors running around after Indomitus, and maybe people actually fielding some Incursors for a change. I really haven't seen that unit played all that much in 8th edition. If you have any other insights as to which one you think is best and why, whether it's in general or for your chapter in specific, then please let me know down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more similar content, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We'll certainly be keeping regular Space Marine Tactics videos coming as 9th edition unfolds. And if you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page, which is down in the video description below. It's only through the support of the channel's Patreons that I can make quite so much YouTube content, so if you have been enjoying my videos, then any support is greatly appreciated. Channel Patreons get to see one video early each week, there are regular polls to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and channel Patreons automatically get entered in the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway, where I post out some pretty big model kits at the start of each month. For the next one at the start of August, we'll be giving away 3 copies of the Indomitus box. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.